Welcome to the Self-Healing Revolution, where ancient wisdom and modern science meet. I am your host, Paige Pierman, owner of Love Yourself, an Ayurveda and integrative wellness center based in Louisville, Kentucky. I offer courses, retreats, and a year-long program in Ayurveda. And I put together this summit because I realized that after over a decade of healing my own life, I realized it took working with many professionals and many different fields to begin to understand the different layers or multidimensional layers of my being. And it was a journey, to say the least. So it's my hope with this summit that you'll learn 3 different things and learn from many speakers in these areas: biohack your body, master your mind, and elevate your soul. And I'm putting on this summit because I feel that we're at a crucial time right now. I believe that we're really in a huge, massive paradigm shift where people are realizing that what was working in the past isn't working anymore. And so with that, I'm so excited today to introduce you to my guest speaker and dear friend, Shawna Pelton. Shawna is a trauma-informed transformational guide with 20 years of experience in helping conscious leaders, change makers, and professionals attain fundamental well-being, specializing in bioenergetic, psychedelic, somatic therapy, and CIQ leadership coaching. She provides everyday leaders with an opportunity to prevent stress-related burnout and attain work-life balance. She helps professionals stop self-sabotaging behaviors and patterns of resistance and rebuild trust with individuals, teams, and entire organizations. So welcome, Shawna. It is my pleasure to share with the world your greatness, and I've experienced it firsthand as a dear friend, and I'm just excited to share this space with you today.
Oh my gosh, same sentiment, sister. And I'm thrilled to be here with you and share this great work with your audience.
Thank you so much. Yeah, so I wanted to jump in right away. I know I just read your bio, but I would like you to share a little bit about your experience over the last 20 years and what led you into this work now at this time.
Sure. So, like most professional health professionals in the holistic healing arts, we usually find our way into this industry because, like you said, what was working in the past isn't working anymore. And that was true for me 20 plus years ago when I found myself in crisis. After the loss of my son's father, he passed away from addictions, and we were struggling to survive. I was a young single mom, and I had so many health issues tied to just from the stress of life down to just simply me not knowing how to live healthy and making very bad decisions. And so I kind of had to leave the traditional system, which was causing me more trouble than help. And I know that's not true for everyone, so I don't want to blanket or statement that or generalize it for everyone. But for me and for people like myself, there's more that we find than the traditional systems. So fast forward 20 years later, here I am. And what I recognized was this healing journey that I have been on, first and foremost for myself, really started to activate within me the things that I knew I was here to do. It was almost as if the purpose for my being became crystallized. It was so clear to me why I'm here. And I absolutely love what I do as a facilitator for people's transformation with mental health, relational, conflict, just living in excellence and self-mastery, all of that. And so I kind of went through the journey on the energetic level to in the spiritual level to the physical, and working with clinical tools and practices as well. I find myself in this now that's really well-rounded and being able to kind of stable. You talk about in this summit, these with modern day science. And so that's how I feel my work can be. It touches both.
Yeah. And to the point of modern day science, I feel that so much around energetic medicine and, like you said, bioenergetics and somatic healing, and now psychedelics, there's all this modern research coming out to support what healers outside of the conventional realm are doing. And so, yeah, with this summit, I want to get in today, especially if you can share some science when we talk about, what you're doing. I'd love for you to share some of the science around that to help validate it, because with each conversation I've had, people are wanting to enter into this space. And yet, like you wrote in your bio, there's some resistance. And if we can help ease the nervousness and the anxiety or the fear around it, because we are in a culture that's, revered science, like give me the data, over the last 100 years. So let's give them the data, because it's coming out and it's being shared. And, and I think those people that have resistance but are curious can then step into this space with more confidence.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, I appreciate that awareness too. And I around like, people are smart, right? People are, I suppose, educated consumers, right? And it's not enough to just simply trust someone who says like, oh, I can do this great thing for you, and these are the results you'll get. We need to know like there's actual evidence behind that. And, for so long, I myself was on this path of just simply trusting, and it didn't feel good for me to be able to like then turn around and say to someone, oh, I can help you, and just trust it. Right. So that data is actually imperative for me anyway, personally speaking. I really appreciate having the science behind what I do. So like, for example, if we're talking about, let's say, start with the psychedelic world, right? So we know this whole like renaissance in psychedelics is upon us. And it's because this huge organization, I won't name it, but this huge organization has done an incredible job at putting together the research and doing the studies, the clinical studies, in order to, get the proof about what's possible using various types of plant medicines and even clinical medicines as well. Like, for example, there's different types of psychedelics that people are not necessarily like, maybe they're a little familiar with, but they don't realize like how significant they are. So we know that according to the research, 67% of any treatment resistant population, like with PTSD, they were no longer qualified as having that diagnosis after, say, 3 MDMA sessions, assisted sessions, right? So that's a huge shift. Whereas 94% of cancer patients reported a significant decrease in the anxiety and depression symptoms after a single therapeutic psilocybin session, which, most people are familiar with magic mushrooms and they think, oh, it's just a trip, right? No, it's more than that. It's actually working to rebuild new neural pathways for safety and success and healing. And then for, say, alcoholism or addiction with heroin, for let's say, they found a between 250 and 270% of an abstinent rate increase when using ketamine assisted psychotherapy. That's huge. That's huge. Yeah. And then even the National Institute of Mental Health actually found that people with bipolar depression, certain types, 79% responded well to ketamine after antidepressants failed them, for example. Now, this is all to say, like, everyone's individual. I don't want to make anybody feel like they can just go out and do these things and they're going to have these results. You have to talk to a trained professional, which is where this whole new renaissance is important to recognize. Like, when I talk about the safety of working with these medicines. And what's important to know is that there's a lot of people, even myself included, in the early days working underground, right? They don't necessarily understand. They're might not be trauma informed. They might not understand what's going on a physiological level. They might not understand what's going on a relational level, like the unconscious part of us that really needs these relationships with these practitioners to be stable, right? To help build a secure attachment style, for example, which is in psychology, that's what we develop in our early stages. But if we didn't have any caregivers, right? I'm sure a lot of people can say like, oh, I look back and I would, there's so many issues that people talk about having from their childhood development years. So it's really important to really vet the person that you're working with in a psychedelic session, and also know the types of medicines, because they're not all equal. It's not like a one size fits all. Every product is unique, product meaning like the medicine, and every individual has a unique need. So the right person will help you understand what those are.
Yeah, in Ayurveda, it said that that everything in the natural world is medicine, but it's medicine when it's given at the right place in the right time with the right person. So understanding the nuances of psychedelics and understanding what's appropriate to whatever symptoms or whatever is emerging within that client, it takes somebody who's trained, obviously, to understand that. And I want to go back to what you were saying earlier, because there was early on, my understanding, even as early as the 60s and 70s, there was a lot of research and studying being done around psychedelics. And then it reached, to my understanding, the mass culture of population during the Nixon era. And the government saw, a lot of anti-war sentiment and a lot going on, during that era. And so I think something that was really phenomenal happening historically got suppressed because of the fact that it wasn't being utilized. It was being utilized as a recreation drug amongst a lot of people, and not being in a trained setting or with a practitioner, somebody who could hold space for people who have a lot of unresolved traumas, or like you said, PTSD or alcoholism or things like that. I mean, you unleash it on a population without a sacred space. I would say sacred space, because you're dealing with multiple layers of someone's being. I mean, this summit's about mind, body, spirit, science. I mean, there's multiple layers of someone's being. So in that recreational space, the healing can't be controlled in the same way. Can you talk about that a little bit, and why now, as this is a psychedelic renaissance, like that it be, I don't know, that there'll be some parameters around that, or what you see happening or what you are experiencing?
Right. Well, first, I like to acknowledge what you said, which is accurate, regarding like how the government saw individuals that were starting to be like, wake up and say like, oh yeah, no, this isn't what we want. And they were empowered. And like, that's part of one of the benefits that can happen when people do this work with these types of medicines, for example. And so, yeah, that's a threat to a government, right? When individuals wake up and they want change. So now that we're starting to kind of mature into, as a country, into this, new paradigm that we talk about, there's now this whole thing where people are starting to explore on their own. And the reason why it doesn't necessarily have the same kind of weight, if you would, by like, let's just say self-exploration, which I'm not against. Like, I don't tell anybody what to do with their bodies. I think that it's against my nature to tell someone what they should and shouldn't do. But in regards to safety and parameters and results, because it's like, well, what's the result you're looking for? And based on that desired result, then I'll provide some parameters and guidelines and help you get to that successfully, right? So around the whole like self-exploration thing, you're not necessarily going to get the same results, because it's not like, one of the things that happens is people don't always remember what comes through during a non-ordinary state of consciousness, like what a psychedelic medicine is used to doing, right? It brings you into this other state of consciousness. And so one issue is like that whole like remembering what comes through. When you're with someone, they're taking notes, and they also help to safely explore that unconscious realm with you. They might have the right questions to ask. They might provide the experience that you need for your body to develop the skills for, again, reprogramming yourself to rebuild that system, the psychological system, the energetic system, all of it. Also, you don't necessarily discharge trauma if you're doing it on your own, because there's a very specific process on a somatic level in order to successfully release any pent-up trauma or stored energies from past traumas, for example. So those things aren't necessarily innately happening just because you're taking a medicine. The other thing too is like if people use it in, say, a social setting, the nervous system is smart enough to know when it is and is not safe. And when you're around a lot of people, it is not safe to access trauma. Your body's not going to go to that place of a profound transformational experience. And instead, it's usually going into the light, like it swims in the shallow end, so to speak. I mean, yeah, maybe some people can report having a profound transcendental experience, or they access some kind of out there feeling or knowing, but it doesn't necessarily work on the biological level, the physiological level, which is where our problems are. Most of our problems aren't with our spiritual nature. Our problems usually lie within what's locked within us on the physiological side. And so that's really important to understand the two. And then the other piece is related to that trauma, that there's so much, like, trauma is widespread. And when I talk about trauma, it's like, you know, recognizing that everybody has either witnessed something that was not safe, right? Or very like intense, or we know someone who did, or we came into a lineage perhaps of someone who did. So it could be our own personal experiences. It could be what we experienced in culture, right? Like the culture, like, for example, a lot of the kids, like our kids grew up post 9/11, right? They didn't know what it was like to feel safe walking right onto the plane and not have to be checked by security the way that we get checked, right? So there's this collective trauma that everyone experienced, for example. Or the other thing is the ancestral. What we're born into is embedded within us. On an unconscious level, it's in our DNA. And so those things come up when it's done in a safe and respectful way, to be able to access any unconscious information and discharge it when you're with the right setting, teacher, all of the above.
Right. It makes total sense.
I was going to ask, does this make sense?
Yeah, it does. It makes sense. Yeah, I feel like you've explained so, like, I guess revisiting the psychedelic renaissance, is there more that you want to say around the psychedelic renaissance? Because I think by now, and maybe it's because we're in the healing world, so it's evident to us, but maybe for some people it may not be evident that there's the psychedelic renaissance. Is there anything else that you feel you want to share around that?
Yeah, absolutely. So when people hear that psychedelics are becoming like a thing, right? Or if they're curious about these different various types of medicines that help you access information that maybe you don't have access to during an ordinary state of consciousness. So like, for example, when we have talk therapy, which I'm an advocate of, I think, you know, it's great to have a talk therapist, and there's so many incredible therapists out there. But when
you're, like I said, everything for the right time at the right person where they're at in their journey. So for some people, that may just be their first entree into working in their mental health field.
Right.
You know?
Absolutely.
Yeah. But if somebody's been in talk therapy and they've done it for a long time and they're looking to go deeper, I think that's usually how this works, right? Like somebody's
Yeah.
been doing something for a while, they're not getting the results that they want, most likely because there is a lot of somatic stuff going on, and
Exactly.
and they haven't had an avenue to get into the somatic body yet.
You nailed it. You nailed it. And then essentially what I find is that people who have done the work, meaning they started to contemplate their lives, they understand that there's this pattern that they're facing, and they've talked to someone, a therapist of sorts, or a coach, or someone that can help them consciously make sense of things differently, maybe reframe stuff, maybe have some tools to resource themselves when they get destabilized, for example. But that being said, you can't access the subconscious part of you during a conscious conversation. And so with psychedelics, it's important to know that not all psychedelics can help you access that subconscious information either. So this thing is the most, I suppose, uncommon knowledge that people need to know or should want to know when they're exploring this possible realm of this area for healing, is that there are 3 tiers of psychedelics. Majority of people, when they hear about, oh, psychedelic therapy, they immediately go to whether it's psilocybin with like mushrooms, or MDMA, or LSD, right? Those things are the common psychedelic medicines that we assume are associated with psychedelics. And what people don't realize is that's 3rd tier. That means that you're going to access oftentimes like an out-of-body experience, or even ayahuasca, right? Ayahuasca is a now popular one, right? So this out-of-body experience is something that's really powerful. However, if someone has really hard to treat trauma, like PTSD, for example, or if they have unresolved issues on the physiological level, on the biological level, or on the ancestral level, like with the DNA, you're not necessarily going to have a sustainable healing. Like people in a transpersonal experience, that's the tier 3, will have a profound awareness, and they come back into their body that has the pain. And then they wonder why, like oftentimes people, this is the dirty secret side of that type of medicine. Sometimes people have a mental health break. I've spoken with people who have had a mental break following a transpersonal experience. And it's because they didn't release the trauma on the physical level first. It's very difficult to come back into a body that doesn't necessarily resonate at the same frequency as the experience that you had when you went out there, out of your body. Whereas the tier 1 is where to begin. So tier 1 is physical. Tier 1 works on that somatic level. Tier 2, which is
just to slow down, what psychedelics are there? Psychedelics at the tier 1 level, or is it just doing somatic body therapy work?
In my experience, Wachuma is a somatic level because it works on the heart level, which helps you to open your heart to trust again, which works on your nervous system. And believe it or not, people are going to be shocked when they hear this, and they're going to even doubt it and throw sticks at me. But it's cannabis. Cannabis is a fantastic tier 1 medicine for the right
person at the right time. Again, like right person at the right time in the right place.
Always. So yeah, let that be the foundational preface for all of this. So cannabis is like, if you were to take it alone, like sometimes people are like, I can't use cannabis, I get anxiety attacks. And I'm like, that's exactly why cannabis works on the physical level. Because
explain that. I want to hear that. So if somebody does cannabis and they get anxiety around the usage of cannabis, what does that mean?
So it's usually accessing stored information in your body that throws your nervous system into the fight or flight response. And when we're
but if that's tier 1, like how do you work with that then?
Yeah. So when we're working with trauma on a physical level, the nervous system's involved, right? So the oftentimes people know when they get triggered by something or someone, they can't control their nervous system. They either react and they go into that, like they get defensive, they want to fight, they don't hear, they have blinders on, they're not hearing what's going on, and they're in the fight mode, or they're in the flight mode, which is like, I want to avoid this, get up and walk away from a discussion that's difficult to have, right? Mm-hmm. That's the fight or flight response. The anxiety that comes through, the panic that comes through, the terror that comes through, all of that. That's the sympathetic nervous system being very, very activated and perhaps even destabilized if you're not guided properly. And then on the opposite, which is the hypo response, people shut down, they get disconnected, they lose their, like, the indifference comes up. It's like, fine, I don't care. Of course you care. You're pretending you don't care. You're shut down from that. Mm. And so that dissociation is a learned skill, because we grew up perhaps in a situation we had no control over, no authority over, and we didn't know how to manage as a child these difficult, anxious moments. And so our body learned to kind of protect ourselves and go into dissociation. So either or, cannabis tends to access that information, that pattern. So when we use it during a somatic process, the medicine during the somatic process, I can guide people to literally release the trauma using those nervous system states and train them how to repattern their nervous system for safety, so to come back into a neutral zone. But that's cannabis can help with that, because it bypasses that kind of like that valve. The subconscious mind does something when it's trying to protect us. It kind of shuts that door. It's like, it's like, no, I can't work with this. I don't have the capacity to work with this. Well, that door is kind of open for a period on cannabis, and we're able to kind of go in without resistance. When someone's conscious and they're not wanting to do it, there's resistance. When they're in the non-ordinary state of consciousness, there's less resistance. And so therefore, they're much more successful at getting the results, the desired outcome that they want. Now, a lot of people who do this cannabis therapy with me aren't cannabis users. They get their medicine 4 sessions and they don't use it outside of those sessions. But some people are.
So you were saying people might be surprised, like throw sticks at you for speaking of cannabis as the phase 1 tier. Yeah. Why did you say that? Because I didn't have any like preconceived notion of what that meant. You must have a sense of what is it, because people are anti-cannabis. What is it that you have experienced?
It's because people think they smoke cannabis and they don't feel good. They're like, oh, no, I don't feel good. And I'm like, that's exactly why we use it. Because it accesses the thing that causes you to destabilize.
Gotcha. So there's like resistance because it's an uncomfortable space, and they're experiencing that uncomfortable space because of what's happening. I gotcha. I'm glad I asked that question, because I was like, well, I don't have this preconceived notion. I thought maybe it was just because, cannabis is trying to get legalized in, certain states. And so there's resistance culturally, but really it's around the individual's resistance to cannabis itself.
Yeah. And then the other resistance is for people who are chronic users, and they say like, oh, I still have trauma and I use it all the time. And I'm like, yeah, but you haven't used it in a setting where you're being facilitated to specifically release trauma on the somatic level. And so that's also a difference as well.
And do you find, I'm really curious around chronic cannabis users, I can see where you're offering a therapy that is going to help get a result, but is there an idea around why someone's constantly coming back to cannabis to cope with their life? I mean, I know several chronic, in my practice as an Ayurvedic practitioner, I have people, and I see that there's chronic cannabis use. And I ask the question to myself as an Ayurvedic practitioner, why is this chronic cannabis use happening for this individual. And what I've experienced, and I need your input here, is what I've seen is a lot of times they're using it to manage stress. They're using it just to cope with stress itself. And it's becoming their only way that they can like relax their nervous system.
Right.
Because they're living a high stress-based lifestyle. So is there anything you want to say around that?
Yeah, I think that you nailed it. People have learned that it can help with their stress. And if they don't have other resources, they might think that there's no hope, right? They might think, well, this is the only thing that works for me. And so learning new resources to actually stabilize your nervous system so that you don't go out of your window of tolerance, meaning you don't get too hyper aroused or shut down so easily whenever, something difficult happens, then you'll find that that dependency kind of reduces. And then number two, there is actually a physiological thing. People will say like we have these cannabidiol. I'm saying the word.
Cannabidiol. I think that's
These receptor sites for cannabinoid. I'm saying it wrong.
Yeah, okay. There are receptor sites that we've ancestrally had in our body, and people are deficient in cannabinoids, right? Or I don't know what the right word is either,
I keep saying it wrong. You'd think I'd know better by now, but whatever. So the cannabinoids get from consuming cannabis in, say, a tincture or smoking it or whatever, however they consume it. They're getting a quantity that's not natural. So we produce our own natural cannabinoids.
We'll just say cannabinoids. We'll just use that for today.
Oh my gosh, this is hysterical to me because I say that I talk about it all the time. You'd think I'd remember. So we produce our own naturally, except when we smoke, it's as if we're flooding those receptor sites with more than what we normally produce. And so then all of a sudden, when that product that we depend on isn't there, then our body doesn't necessarily satisfy us, or it's like that little amount that we can produce. Either one doesn't give us the same fix, or number two, doesn't get really used. It's like atrophy. It's like the use it or lose it kind of thing. So we do end up with a physical dependency. And for people who say that you can't get addicted to cannabis is fooling themselves, because of course we can.
Right. I love that you said that, because I think in that situation then, and this just leads me to so many questions, because I can think of several individuals, if not more right now in my head, that are dependent upon it. And I love that you said that, because it's almost like a dopamine hit, right? Like you go and let's say it's social media, and you're getting, you're looking for those likes, and you're getting these like dopamine hits, but then you don't have any like self-regulation and a way to naturally, aid your dopamine levels without getting these highs and lows.
Right. Exactly.
So the body gets dependent upon this artificial versus this innate, and it's coming innately. Exactly. Again, why I think it's so important to work with somebody who understands all of this, because, I can think of one individual right now who would like to not be dependent upon cannabis, and yet doesn't have any avenue, to aid that process, because there's no understanding of how to work with the nervous system when, he's an executive with high-based lifestyle, travels constantly. It's just a lot of stress. And so, it's very interesting.
Which is why it's also important. This kind of speaks to choosing the right practitioner as well to work with, because sometimes there's practitioners who are trained to just sit with you during a session. They don't necessarily facilitate you outside of a session to condition your body to restabilize itself. And so it's the reason why I talk about the psychedelic, bioenergetic, and somatic therapy work, and this healing work and coaching work, is because it's important to have all aspects, because one on by themselves, one of these individual types of therapies by themselves alone is pretty awesome. But when you combine them all together, you get to the next level with what's possible. And so the whole bioenergetic piece of what I do, and when people are like, well, what's bioenergetics? You'll be familiar with it with like Qigong, for example, breath work, just yogic practices.
Asana. Yeah, asana itself.
Exactly. These things are bioenergetic practices because they help you to, one, ground your energy body, which stabilizes your nervous system. It helps you to feel connected to the source, which is source of creation. It could be the universe, it could be God, whatever concept that people resonate with. And it also helps you to find your center. And so in that, you're able to much more efficiently integrate whatever great insights come up during a session, whether it's psychedelic or not. Sometimes people do know psychedelics with me. We just do somatic work. We do trauma work. We access really deep stuff. And then we have to stabilize. So the somatic work and the bioenergetic work are powerful combined. Add the psychedelic piece for the really difficult stuff that's very hard to treat. And there you have like a triple play. It's powerful. It is absolutely transformative, quite profound, in fact.
Yeah, I want to go more into that. But before we do, I don't want to abandon what you were saying about phase 1 and phase 2 and phase 3. We talked about 1 and 3, but let's go back to 2. And then I want to circle back around because I feel like we missed 2 and I just want you to share that. And then we can come back. We'll come back and revisit this.
So tier 2 is working on a level that is more mental, right? You address the reactive part of your nervous system with tier 1. At tier 2, you're actually remodeling that core sense of self so that you can give new meaning to all the things that you lived through. So you can have a new meaning in life. And that's something that's really important as you release any stuff that's coming out from tier 1. Then you want to start to reframe things so that you can be more in a positive biased mind versus negative biased. And by the way, negative bias is a common thing following any type of trauma, conscious or not. People, again, remember, it's like our dramas and traumas in life cause conditioning. So a negative bias is truly a protective mechanism because it wants us to keep that part of our psyche wants us safe, right? Physically safe, emotionally safe, right? We want to, and mentally safe. We want to be able to protect ourselves from the threats. It's like, for example, one of the big threats, like, don't let anyone in, don't trust anyone, because you know what? They're going to disappoint you. And then you're going to be hurt. And then where are you going to be? Right. So we create conditions, for example, around that story, that negative bias. So the tier 2 is helping to shift into a positive bias, but from a place of reason, where it's like, yeah, could you get hurt again? Absolutely. That's a possibility. We don't want to pretend that it's not possible, but we also want to open up to what else might be possible. So tier 2 helps with that.
Wow, that's so huge. It's like rewriting your story. It's able to, like you said, to allow some release, but then most people don't know what's possible after that. They don't know what they're capable of. They don't know how to rewrite that story. And yet they may have some practices. I had someone on here where we talked about journaling and visioning and, having mantra, having intention. These are all very powerful things. And yet at the same time, there has to be the capacity to take that step, like not just to like have it in your intentional, energetic realm, but actually to step physically into a new version of you.
Yes, exactly. And it's not an overnight process, and it's not easy to do alone. It's not impossible. I'm not going to say it's impossible. I think, it takes a very specific type of very determined, disciplined person to do it on their own, but more often than not, we're relational creatures. We need each other. And so you need a helper, a guide, a teacher to get you through these types of things.
Yeah, which is precisely why I'm doing the summit, because I feel like people, they'll Google something and they'll go down the rabbit hole of like, what could I do for healing? And yet they still need some mentor, guide, teacher, instructor, as somebody to help, because they've walked that path or they've seen it, they've experienced it. Like take me as a practitioner, you as a practitioner. If I've seen something 10 times or 20 times or 30 times, I can say, oh, I've identified this. I know the patterns that I'm working with and I know how to help you. Whereas you've never seen this before. You've never felt this before. You've never witnessed this before. So how would you know?
Exactly.
Other than just shooting in the dark? How would you know?
Right.
Which I think, is very powerful. People need to feel there's community. They need to feel that there's a safe space. They need to feel that there's someone, like you said, they can trust. We started with that. Is the trust there? I mean, it's great that you say you can do this, but I have to trust you. I have to know that this on the nervous system level, that I can move forward, that it's possible.
Yep, exactly.
Right. So before we leave level 2 or phase 2, what psychedelics, what mediums would you?
Yeah, for that, ketamine would be a good tier 2, dependent on how you use it. Again, it's like sometimes ketamine is tier 3 if you're in a clinical setting and they inject you or you get a really high dose. But say if someone does a sublingual or nasal spray dose, smaller, kind of less intense experience, you can stay present. That's helpful. I can also use cannabis for tier 2 if it has to be strategic, right? And there's different ways in which you do it. And then I can also use MDMA for tier 2 as well. I find that is something that gives people, like, it takes down that like guardedness. It gives people that open sense of like, I'm safe, I can trust this, all is well. And then all of a sudden you start to see things from that new perspective. And then following a session, this is really important, like following a session, you want to integrate all that stuff that comes through, because again, it's not just the experience. Like having this session is really awesome. What you do with what comes up during that session is where the rubber meets the road. And so if you have these new insights and you're writing them down, you're journaling them, and then you're taking new action, so to actually become what I call a vibrational match to that higher version of yourself, right? That
I love that, a vibrational match to your higher version.
Yep.
Because ultimately the soul, I mean, because the next level of the summit is the soul. I mean, ultimately it knows where it wants to go. There's just, like you said, there's so much resistance around getting there.
Yes. And resistance is not on a soul level. All resistance lies in
Exactly. It's not there. There's the resistance isn't coming. The soul knows, the heart knows what needs to transpire next. But it's all that residue, that gunk in the, whether it be the energetic body or the physical body that hasn't been cleared yet.
Exactly. And sometimes people find themselves where they're at a place where they think they've done all the work, right? They're like, oh my gosh, I've been
yes, there's so many people. It's like, I think I'm done. It's like, you're not.
You're not done. You're not done. But
I tell people that all the time. I humble myself in my practice. And I said, if you think I'm done, no, we're all on this journey. Like I always call it, what is your next growing edge? What is the next version of you that needs to come forward? There's no, one of my mentors, Kate Stillman, said, there's never an end goal. Like if you think there's an end goal, that's just when you've realized that the biggest stuff is starting to come through.
Actually, you'll be humbled by the universe. Yes. If you're like, oh, I'm good, I'm done. Yeah, right.
That's the joke. That's when all the stuff creeps in and tells you you're not.
Right.
Yeah.
However, there are things that we can definitely like put a bow on. And what I mean by that is to say there's certain patterns that you will find shapeshift so much that you don't even recognize yourself when looking back.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And so there are certain things that when you find healing with, you basically are changing the relationship you have with the things. Well, first of all, with the memory of that thing, whatever the past experience that brought you the great pain, and also with the pattern of how you behaved and how you felt and all the triggered stuff that's around it. You change your relationship with that. And that to me is what healing is. Being in right relationship with life. So when people come and they're like, oh my gosh, I've been working on this, we have to recognize that healing has a rhythm. Excuse me. So like life will tell you when it's time to push. Like in labor, right? You've had children. You know what it's like when you get, like, you hear the call. It's like, wait a minute, I think it's time. And then life is going to say, all right, it's time to push or it's time to pause. And that's what we have to listen for. I'm going to cough. Hold on.
I love that you also said, since you're coughing, I'm going to say this, like there's a time to push and there's a time to pause. And that's like that in Ayurveda and yogic philosophies, there's spanda, it's pulsation period. There's a time for expansion, but likewise, we cannot always be expanding. We cannot always be growing. We cannot always be pushing. That's yang energy. There's a time where we do need to contract and we do need to come within and we do need to sit with something and have an integration period or a time to go under, or you might go down into the shadow work. It can't be all expansion all the time, because the nature of life itself, spanda, is expansion and contraction, expansion and contraction. Like we can't be in an economy that's constantly expanding. There's times where we go into recession periods. It's just like that. If we were always expanding, we wouldn't be able to see the nuances of what needs to emerge next, or, what's coming through, like you said.
And it's during those kind of, I call them the contraction stages, right? Where we expand and contract, that we actually kind of cultivate the energy to grow even beyond the last place we were. So when we go in and we rest and we recover, we restabilize ourselves, then we'll feel that call to push again and to grow even more beyond our comfort zone. But one thing that I'm always cautious of with people, and really stress this, is to know yourself enough to know the difference between stretching and hurting yourself. Where this whole thing around this window of tolerance that we have with our nervous system is going to be your guidepost, your guiding light. Again, primary consciousness, or tier one, what the tier one psychedelics work with, primary consciousness, is body. And the body keeps the pace of your growth, because your soul is going to be patient. Your soul is going to be like, I can do this for the rest of eternity. It depends on what your soul is capable of. So sometimes people come to me because they say, I want to be capable of growth. And so we work on increasing that capacity to grow even beyond where they were before. And so that takes skills to know where you're at and to what you can move into and what you need in order to stabilize yourself. And that's like that's an art form, really. It's like really, truly an art form, to pay so close attention that you know what your body needs when you need it.
Yeah, I believe Ayurveda is one of those paths. I'm not trying to like pitch myself here, but it's a journey. It really is a journey into knowing the self, because you begin to know what homeostasis looks like. When you build your physical body, your energetic body, your emotional body, then we have what's in Ayurveda called ojas. It's a deep strength or deep vitality, but we don't get there without some of that deep rest and restoration and rejuvenation. But we learn skills to be able, so that when the soul has its calling, or what we call our dharma, or our life purpose, we can expand out in a vast way, because the container has a deep understanding of its energetic self and what it's capable, and how to cultivate energy, or how to build energy within the body. You and I've touched a little bit on this when I was with you last, but yeah, so you've covered the 3 different tiers. Let's go back to all 3 of these together, and why this creates such a beautiful, synchronistic way of working with people. It's like bringing these three components of the somatic, the psychedelic, and the bioenergetic together.
Yeah, sure. So when people are ready for change, usually they are feeling that urge or that calling for more. And one of the things that happens is they start to kind of throw spaghetti at the wall, right? To see what sticks. They start to kind of apply. It's like, oh, I heard I'm supposed to meditate. I guess I'm going to meditate all the time. Oh, I heard I'm supposed to do yoga. I guess I'm going to do yoga. They basically start to piecemeal, right? All these things. And they don't necessarily go on the journey of healing in a very strategic, intentional way. It's almost like a frenetic type of energy. And so it's like the rubber's not meeting the road, nothing's sticking, or they might feel somewhat better because these things are helpful, but they're not necessarily getting those results that they are wanting. And so with this trio, this trinity, if you would, of therapies, healing services, I guess, like practices, you're able to, one, actually create a very strategic approach. And again, with the support of someone who knows what they're doing, be able to like literally take the steps necessary based on where you are to get to the next level, to grow at the next stage, and then kind of strategize the whole journey with all of the aspects that are essentially needed, because you need it on a mental level, you need it on an emotional level, you need it on a physical level, on a spiritual level, on an energetic level, all of these things, and a relational level, all of it. So the psychedelic piece is going to help to work on the subconscious level, as will the somatic. Those two things are really powerful to access body knowledge, body wisdom. And so when you're able to bypass the protective personality using those two types of approaches, and remember, not everyone does the psychedelic. It's usually like a big heavy hitter for some people who feel really, really stuck. But the somatic work, let's say alone, is going to access the subconscious narrative. And the narrative is comprised of feelings, sensations, emotions, thoughts, stories you tell yourself, belief systems you have, words, as well as behaviors. And so that entire narrative is almost like it's protective cocoon around the wounds that we have. And so the somatic work really goes deep into that to help to unravel that narrative, or that cocoon rather. And the somatic work, or the psychedelic work, helps to break down those protective parts in a way that's like it's deconstruction. That's what I call it. It deconstructs you. And then with the somatic, now using somatic and bioenergetic work, we begin to reconstruct. So it's this undoing and renewing that happens. So this, imagine like on a somatic level, you're starting to create a new pattern. You're literally rewiring your nervous system. You're physically creating circuits from your energetic body into the physical, into the brain, that's actually able to access places that it hasn't had access before. Like, for example, what most people don't realize is that let's call a healthy brain neurotypical for a moment. All right. So a healthy neurotypical brain, when at rest, that means they're just kind of chill. There's nothing going on. If you were to look under, I think it's like an MRI that's able to do like a heat map and look what centers of the brain are active in that moment, they find that you actually have open pathways to all of the parts of your brain. Now, remember, those parts of your brain are for creative thinking, for reasoning, for emotions, for stories, for protection, all of it. The wholeness of your brain you're able to access when at rest. But for someone who is suffering from trauma, whether they're conscious of it or not, when they're at rest, the parts of their brain that are supposed to be open and available are actually shut down. And the only,
it's the reverse.
exactly. And the only thing they have access to is protection. So the mind is constantly hypervigilant, looking for problems, looking for,
or even projecting out into the world and creating problems so that
that
it can
too.
be safe,
Well,
right?
then that's what they discovered. The science, the new neuroscience shows that as well as the work with the somatic work on this as well, the nervous system and the body and all of it, it's actually showing that when someone who has a traumatized brain is at rest, they unconsciously create drama in their lives so to feel alive, because they need to access those parts of the brain that someone who's healthy and at rest has access to. That's what feeling alive is like.
Wow.
When someone's not able to feel that, they're going to unconsciously create circumstances and conditions that cause all of those circuits to come alive. And so this is why people create drama. This is why
I was going to say, I think we can all identify someone that we know that has done that. It's like, oh, wow, why are they
even I'm guilty of it.
Right. Or like, why are they self-sabotaging when,
Yes.
when it doesn't really make sense? You can see it objectively as like the objective observer.
Right.
But having a nervous system and a scientific explanation for why this
Right.
is happening is beneficial for
Yeah.
someone who's in that reverse patterning.
Exactly. And so what the science shows is that by combining certain somatic practices and bioenergetic practices, you're able to actually rebuild the circuits so to have access to those parts of your brain. And so it really gives you a new lease on life, because you don't have to create the drama anymore. Those patterns that once you didn't know why you were creating those patterns, everyone knows it's like the thing that constantly happens. It's like, why does this keep happening to me? Why do I keep attracting the same people, the same characters, right, in my life, or the same situations in my life? Well, now you know. And now you know that there is a way in which is proven scientifically to be able to shift that pattern. Now, I can't say it's going to happen overnight like before. There's a journey, but you know what? It can happen where you can shift. And I believe that's what wholeness is. Quite literally, brain wholeness is body wholeness, which is the entire being starts to feel alive, on board, purposeful, meaningful living.
Mm-hmm. I love what you said about there being a range of expansion and contraction, and being able to find out where your ability is within the nervous system to know when you're bumping up against like your capacity, if you will, but then also knowing if you're pulling back to a place that's maybe more detrimental. And I think about the vagus nerve, and I think about a lot, like even a lot of things Ayurvedically, or, doing cold showers, like, or even pranayama, you expand your capacity, and you strengthen the vagus nerve, and you expand the capacity to allow your nervous system to feel comfortable. You could do it with fasting, you could do it in silence, you could do it with breath work. But I believe in this conversation with you, what's really powerful in terms of the psychedelics, like there's subtle therapies, there's ways of doing this, like you said, with asana, with breath work. There's lots of ways therapeutically to do this without psychedelics. And there's a lot in the Ayurveda, yogic, and Kundalini tantric world, because there'll be other speakers in the summit who will be speaking to some of this. But what I believe is really interesting about what you're doing, Shawna, is that if someone's been in a place for a really long time and they're coming up against something over and over and over again, and they've tried these other paths, this is a pathway that could break some walls down that they've been bumping up against and not sure, like you said, how to get to that next level. And we've even had a conversation about Rajas and Thomas. Like, we had an interesting conversation. You were interested in that because there's times when people are stuck, there's inert energy. And then there's Rajas, which is like drama, and like you said, creating this constant sense of like arousal, which is not healthy. There's also an unhealthy state of just being stuck and not knowing how to move forward. Well, in Ayurveda, you use the rajas to waken up the tamas, the inertia. And then the inertia can, sometimes you could use like tamasic therapies to calm the rajas. But what's beautiful about what you're doing is there's this range or this capacity, if you will, to help break down those walls, but help someone's nervous system navigate that terrain of where they're retracting or going too far into the past or into the trauma, and then the ability to break that mold and move forward. And I believe that's the beauty of what you're offering here. And I want to say, I know we're coming up on our time. I really want you to get into where your work is now, how you're bringing this into professionals and individuals in the workforce and organizations, to help people, you know, in that capacity that you're working in right now. Can you talk about that?
Absolutely. Well, one of the things that has happened since the pandemic is that there's been a 60+% increase in cases of severe psychological kind of distress and conflict for people. And so on a professional level, that translates into disability claims, mental health and behavioral health. Disability claims are through the roof. And I have a client who owns an insurance. He's an insurance provider, like has a company that provides the insurance. And he says it's an epidemic that they've never seen before. And we know that we're experiencing a collective trauma, what we're going through right now.
And that's why one of the reasons, you know, I said at the beginning, why I created the summit, why I created the self-healing revolution, is I believe that there's this, this deep wound in our collective. There's this deep desire to know that what we talked about, coming full circle, that where we've been is not going to help us in the future, that we've come up against this wall, if you will. We were just talking about a wall within our own healing. We've come up against a collective wall of what has worked in the past isn't working anymore. And people beginning to really ask those profound questions of, if this is no longer working and it's not serving me, and I mean, we've talked in many different interviews on the summit about pharmaceuticals, and it's like, but I have more symptoms and I'm getting worse, and I'm not finding these breakthroughs. I'm not finding this holistic path. I'm not bringing in all parts of my multidimensional self. And especially with the workforce, I mean, what worked in the past in the workforce is no longer going to work. And this new reality that we're in with technology and people working from home and that work-life balance, you know, that people are asking for, they're seeking. People want a new way of living that hasn't been given to us yet, or hasn't, unless you've paved and been a trailblazer for your own profession, as you and I have been. A lot of this isn't available to you yet, or you haven't even touch the tip of the iceberg in terms of what's possible. But yeah, I mean, so bringing this into institutions, organizations, nonprofits, into groups.
Yeah. And that's what we're doing with, you know, with the Rex Mudo program that I run with Chris Whitko, that I believe is also on your summit. We're going to be, we are helping professionals on that mental health level, but on an individual level, it's one thing, right? But in a group setting, recognize that when people are constantly triggered, when people are constantly stressed because life, all right, regardless of what's happening at work, life is right now what it is. It's a dumpster fire. Then all of a sudden they come into the office and everyone's butting heads. People are at odds. And so we're helping people rebuild lost trust and to create a psychological safety within the organizations and teach trauma-informed leadership skills. So that's something that I'm really excited to be able to share.
Wow, what a gift for humanity. I've really enjoyed diving into this conversation with you. And you and I've had multiple conversations individually, and I've enjoyed every single one, but this one especially, and that we can now share this with many, many people. So
Thank
before we end, will you like to share a free gift that you're offering for our listeners?
Yeah, sure. I actually have a process that I've created called the quantum shift process. It's a really simple but effective self-help tool that people can use whenever those old patterns get triggered. Remember, I talked about the sensations, about the thoughts and stories that we have, as well as the behaviors. So this quantum shift process can be found on my website. You can register for it at shawnapelton.com. It's really easy to follow, and it actually works at helping to create a rapid emotional state change and rewire your system for safety and success.
Thank you so much for giving this free gift. Thank you for speaking with me today. It's been a pleasure.
My pleasure too. Thank you. Hope it was helpful.
Namaste. Yeah, namaste.